A caller rings James O'Brien to argue that Palestinian deaths are just collateral damage. James asks him one simple question, and what happens next is one of the most devastating admissions I've ever heard on live radio.
Today's conversation chiefly hinges upon the question of whether or not we've reached the point that it often seems we will always reach, which is where, in defense of its existential right, Israel will undertake actions that brook no criticism or even perhaps accommodation of international law. That's all. It's not a question of whether they have the right to do that or whether they should do that. It's a question of whether or not that is where we actually are. Stuart is in Harrow. Stuart, what would you like to say?
I don't think that they're not being criticised. There's lots of restraint being urged by UK and America. I also think there's a bit of a false equivalence with the kind of killing of Palestinian children or adults and Israelis. I mean, one is too many, and one life are equal, but one has been killed on purpose, and the other is that awful phrase, collateral damage. So I don't think it helps anyone to say they're murdering them when there's no proof that they are. I mean, there obviously might be some soldiers who do some terrible things, but in general, you'd have to assume that they're doing everything they do is for security reasons and their own protection. Now, you could argue that they, that
well, I don't have to assume that, because I don't think it is, and there's lots of people. No, hang on, just let me tell you why. Because you've even got families of the victims now in Israel complaining that this looks more like revenge than not.
Well, they're saying it's not revenge, and
they're saying it. Look, they're saying the families of the victims are saying it does look like revenge.
The families of which victims?
The victims of the October the 7th terror attack.
That's fine. That's an opinion. It doesn't mean they're right. It doesn't mean they're right.
No, but I'm just saying you can't talk about what people can and can't presume when the families of the dead are actually saying this looks more like revenge than it does look like sort of tactical response. That's all. So I mean, it's important that their voice is heard. No, I'm not telling you what I think. I'm telling you what they think.
Well, you can presume. You're saying you can presume. You're saying you actually can presume. Well, you can't presume either way. I'm not presuming, and you're not presuming. Okay. You're here you're in the safety of London.
Yes.
You just don't know. We just don't know. They could do.
What? Sorry, I think I distracted you there semantically, which is unhelpful. So I apologise. What your central point is that you said you don't like the false equivalence, but to make that point, then you have to, and then you use the word collateral. Then you use the word collateral damage. So you're saying that it doesn't matter how many Palestinian people die, it will never be as bad as the murdered Israelis on October the 7th.
No, I'm not saying that at all.
What's you saying?
One is too many. I just say it doesn't help. I just say it doesn't help to call the Israelis murderers and killing, and to make an equivalence between what happened, the massacre, people doing something on purpose, and people not killing people on purpose.
Yes,
that's what I'm saying.
See, that's where I struggle.
One life is the same.
How can you say it's not on purpose?
Sorry. They're not killing. Their aim, the motivation is not to go and kill children.
What is it?
That's not their motivation. It's to eradicate Hamas. And Hamas, the existential threat from Israel comes from Hamas. Have you read their founding charter?
Yes, of course I have. I quote it regularly on the programme.
So there you are. So their existential threat is real and it's from someone next door.
But they are not. The Palestinians that are being killed deliberately.
They are not.
You can't shoot. You can't fire a missile by accident. Well, you can, but that's not. No one's claiming that that's what's happening here. Can I run something by you, Stuart?
Sure.
What if Hamas was hiding in Israel? What would the Israeli government do then to eradicate them?
They would seek them out.
But no, what would they do? Would they adopt the same policies? Would they be blowing up Israeli hospitals after issuing a warning to get all the patients out of intensive care?
That's another myth, isn't it? They haven't blown up a hospital.
Well, don't let me distract you from the question I asked. How do you think the Israel? No. I said that they have, prior to presumably bombarding it, they've issued an order to evacuate from the Al-Quds hospital in Gaza City. We can agree on what the facts are. Let's not get distracted from the central question. If Hamas was hiding in Israel, what policies would you still approve of the Israeli collateral damage approach to eradicating Hamas?
I don't approve of anything. I don't disapprove or approve of anything.
Okay. Would you still use the phrase collateral? Would you still use the phrase collateral damage?
Yes, of course I would.
So 3,000 dead Israelis would be a price worth paying for the pursuit of Hamas.
I didn't say the Palestinians.
Well, what are you saying, Stuart? What are you saying?
I'm just saying it's very important to be specific and be very
I am
careful
being specific.
on language.
I am being. I'm saying, what would
you
your...
can presume that Israel are murdering...
No, I've done the opposite of that. I've done the opposite of that. I spent 20 minutes at the top of the show outlining the existential motivation of Israel's actions, talked about Dagestan, and I said people will have a problem with however I do this, and I'm grateful to you for proving that. But I think this is a really important question. Whenever I hear the phrase collateral damage, or I hear objections to language or claims that it's not the same, do you think that if Hamas was hiding in Israel, the Israeli army would be pursuing the same tactics in pursuit of them with regard to civilian life?
No, I don't.
Well, there it is. Why not?
Because Hamas are the enemy in another country. It would be a terrorist situation.
It is a terrorist situation. But why would they not go after Hamas with the same tactics in Israel that they're going after them in Palestine, in Gaza?
For obvious reasons.
Well, tell me what they are.
Because they wouldn't be... If they were in a hospital, people do get killed in hospital situations. Yeah. They do eventually storm buildings, and the hospital...
But why is collateral damage acceptable in one...
I didn't say it was acceptable.
Okay, why is it collateral damage then if it happens in Gaza but not if it happens in Israel?
The motivation is different between the murderous death cult.
Yes,
and
I agree.
The Israeli
I completely agree. But that's why I'm not
all
asking that question.
When you say words like they're doing it on purpose and it's out of revenge, you have absolutely no proof that they are killing
I didn't say they were
people.
doing it on revenge. I said families of the victims of Hamas attacks have warned Israel's government that revenge is not a policy amid mounting concerns about civilian casualties in Gaza. You don't get to put words in my mouth, but you do get to answer.
Say that, and also
you do get to answer my question. Why would it be different for the Israeli army to cause collateral damage in Israel as opposed to in Gaza? Why would it be different?
I would say they're less likely to do that.
No, but this is the question. Why would they be less likely to go after Hamas in the same way if they were hiding in Israel that they are if they're hiding in Gaza?
Because there would be Israelis there.
Pardon?
And they would care less about. They would care more about Israeli lives than Palestinian lives. But they're also.
And that's it. That's all I wanted, and I'm grateful. I'm grateful for your honesty.
Well.
It's tenfold. No, you carry on. Talk about the hostages.
Yeah, well, they're being criticised for ignoring the plight of the hostages. So they are willing to make them collateral damage, if you like. And
okay.
you said that.
Yeah, no, I think that seems possible to me, and I think that's pitiful as well. But what you're doing is edging ever closer to the thing that you described at the beginning of your call as false equivalent.
I'm just saying you've got to be careful with language.
Okay. Well, thanks for the warning.
I need to talk about it because this is one of those conversations where you watch someone walk themselves into a corner so slowly and so completely that by the time they realise where they are, it's too late. The door's shut, the lock's clicked, and James is standing on the other side holding the key. And the beautiful thing about this one is that James barely had to do anything. He just asked questions. That's it. He just kept asking questions and let Stuart do all the work. So let me set this up. Stuart calls in from Harrow, and his position is essentially that there's a false equivalence being drawn between Israeli and Palestinian deaths. He says one is too many on both sides, sure, but one side is killing deliberately and the other is collateral damage. That's his framework. Israelis were murdered on purpose on October 7th, which is true. That was a horrific terror attack. But Palestinian deaths, according to Stuart, are just the unfortunate byproduct of a legitimate security operation. Not deliberate, not on purpose, just the awful cost of going after Hamas. Now, on the surface, that sounds like a reasonable position. A lot of people hold it, you hear it constantly, and Stuart delivers it with that very calm, very measured tone that people use when they think they're being the rational adult in the room. He's not shouting, he's not emotional, he's just laying out what he sees as a logical distinction: purpose versus accident, murder versus collateral damage, and he genuinely believes this framing is airtight. But here's where James does what James does. He doesn't argue with the framing. He doesn't say you're wrong. He doesn't get into a shouting match about numbers or international law. He just asks one question, and it's devastating. He says, what if Hamas was hiding in Israel? What would the Israeli government do then?
And you can almost hear Stuart's brain short-circuit, because he knows where this is going. Everyone listening knows where this is going, but he can't not answer it. So he tries. He says, well, they would treat them out. They'd handle it like a terrorist situation. And James pushes. Would they blow up Israeli hospitals? Would they level Israeli neighborhoods? Would they accept thousands of dead Israeli civilians as collateral damage in pursuit of Hamas? And Stuart says, no, they wouldn't. And that's the whole game right there. That's the entire argument collapsed in about 30 seconds, because Stuart has just admitted that the Israeli military would treat Israeli civilian lives differently than Palestinian civilian lives. He's admitted that collateral damage is only acceptable when it's Palestinian collateral damage. When it's Israeli lives at stake, suddenly there would be a different approach. Suddenly it would be a hostage situation. Suddenly they'd be more careful. And James, to his credit, doesn't even gloat about it. He just says, that's it. That's all I wanted. And I'm grateful for your honesty. And honestly, I am too, because Stuart said the quiet part out loud. He admitted that Israeli lives and Palestinian lives are not valued equally by the Israeli military. And look, that's not exactly a revelation to anyone who's been watching the news. But hearing someone who started the call defending Israel's actions actually say it out loud is significant, because that's the whole foundation of the collateral damage argument crumbling in real time. Now, what I find fascinating about this call is how Stuart keeps trying to police James's language throughout. He doesn't like the word murder. He doesn't like the implication that it's deliberate. He keeps saying you have to be careful with language, you can't presume. And James actually agrees with some of that. He says, look, I spent 20 minutes at the top of the show outlining Israel's existential motivation. He's not being unfair. He's acknowledging the complexity. But Stuart doesn't want complexity. Stuart wants a clean binary. Good guys and bad guys, purpose and accident. And life is just not that simple. The other moment that really stuck with me is when James brings up the families of October 7th victims. Because these aren't Palestinian activists. These aren't people with an anti-Israel agenda. These are Israeli families who lost loved ones in the worst terror attack in the country's history. And they're saying this looks more like revenge than a tactical response. And Stuart's response is basically, well, that's just their opinion. Doesn't mean they're right. I mean, think about that. The families of the dead, the people who have more right than anyone on earth to want Hamas destroyed, are looking at what's happening and saying this has gone too far. And Stuart, sitting in the safety of Harrow, is telling them they're wrong. That takes a special kind of certainty that I'm not sure any of us should have about a situation this complex. And then there's the hostages point, which James kind of threads in at the end, because even the hostages, Israeli hostages held by Hamas, are being treated as acceptable losses by their own government, according to many of their families. The very people you'd think would be the absolute top priority are being sidelined in favor of the military campaign. So even within Stuart's own framework, even if you accept that everything Israel does is for security, you have to reckon with the fact that the security operation appears to be prioritizing the destruction of Gaza over the safe return of Israeli hostages. And if you can't square that, then maybe the framework needs adjusting. What I think makes this call so effective, though, is that James doesn't lecture Stuart. He doesn't call him names. He doesn't accuse him of being callous or racist or anything like that. He just follows Stuart's own logic to its natural conclusion. He takes the premises that Stuart himself laid out and shows where they lead. And where they lead is to a place that Stuart clearly didn't want to go. A place where he's admitting that Palestinian lives are worth less than Israeli lives in the calculus of this conflict. And he admits it not because James tricked him, but because that is genuinely what he believes. He just didn't expect to have to say it out loud. And that's the thing about these conversations. A lot of people hold positions that they've never stress tested. They've never had someone calmly and methodically walk them through the implications of what they're actually saying. And when someone does, when someone like James O'Brien just keeps asking why and how and what if, the whole thing unravels. Not because the questions are unfair, but because the position was never as solid as they thought it was. It just felt solid because nobody had ever pushed on it before. Stuart ends the call by saying, you've got to be careful with language. And James says, thanks for the warning. And honestly, that's the perfect ending, because Stuart came into this call wanting to police how people talk about this conflict. He wanted to draw clean lines between murder and collateral damage, between deliberate and accidental, between Israeli and Palestinian death. And he left having admitted that the line he was trying to draw doesn't actually exist. The distinction between deliberate killing and collateral damage kind of evaporates when you admit that the same military would never accept that level of collateral damage if the civilians were their own people. So yeah, be careful with language, Stuart says, but maybe also be careful with logic, because when your logic leads you to admitting that some lives matter more than others, the language is the least of your problems.